Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Shepard. I'm an instructor here at CTC Train Canada, Ottawa, and I'd like to welcome you to the webinar for Outlook 2013. This is going to be a brief webinar. It's going to take about approximately 45 minutes or so. I'll be taking a few questions and things at the end of the session, but essentially it's going to take just shy of about an hour or so. So before we get going, I just wanted to give everyone a sense of my perspective and where I come from. I'm a certified Microsoft Office Master Specialist for 2007. I'm also an Excel 2010 Certified Expert Specialist. And I've been using Outlook since about version 2000 or so. Outlook is kind of an interesting program because it's kind of bounced around a lot. I teach Outlook maybe only a few days a year. I teach it occasionally. But I really like this new version 2013. There's a lot of improvements to it. Things are very modern and very compact. And so the goal for today is to really just give you a nice quick overview of a lot of those key features, as well as a few hints and tips, and also to just give you a good sense of what's capable in the program. So certainly this is not intended to replace a full day of training, but certainly just give you a quick overview of some of the essentials and to sort of take it from there. So I actually have Outlook running here. Just give me a minute while I go into WebEx and we'll get everything going in terms of the sharing. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start sharing the full version of Outlook here, and you can sort of see what I have going on. So what I actually have in my version of Outlook is I actually have Outlook, and essentially there's a starting screen called Outlook Today, which kind of gives you a sort of a nice sort of heads up of everything, of all of your calendar, your tasks and messages. I actually have an internal Exchange server, which I would normally teach in a typical class. And I also have my primary email address as well, mjsottawa@hotmail.com. And the primary reason why I have that there is just so that if you wanted to see a few more of the advanced features, or if you have any particular questions, you can get an idea of what that all looks like. I'm mostly going to be spending my time in the local classroom test version of this, just so you can get a handle on the essentials. But I have Hotmail over here, just in case if you needed to see those extra details. So let's start a little bit first with some of the essentials of working with Outlook 2013. Outlook 2013 is, as we all know, is primarily an email package, but it is also a complete organizational tool from the point of view of managing things like your calendar, as well as your people and your tasks. And what's really interesting about working with this new version of Outlook is that you have sort of a piece of text at the very bottom, which kind of gives you a nice little quick preview of what's going on with your current life. So whenever you're highlighting your mail or your calendar or your people, you don't actually need to click on that section. You can actually just hover over top of it, and you can see a lot of the really cool things and the really sort of the key essentials of how to use the actual product. Now, in most cases, when I usually teach Outlook, I often tend to start people with the calendar. And the reason why I like to do that is because when you're working with the calendar, you can actually see like complete calendars and things side by side. You can see that I have my Hotmail calendar as well as my Live App local calendar. I don't tend to use the calendar all that much in Outlook very much, mostly because I tend to use Outlook online. So for that reason, I don't tend to see as many of my appointments, although you will notice that there's a number of really neat features that have been included in this new version of Outlook. Most notably, you have features for things like your weather, right? So as you're going through and you're looking at your calendar, you have a whole bunch of options that allow you to easily look at what's going on. So for example, you have a day-based view, which allows you to sort of zoom in on that. You have a work week-based view, which is strictly Monday to Friday. You have the full calendar week, and you have the entire month, and you have a special view called the scheduling view. And the whole idea of that is to sort of give you a sense of whether or not you're available or free for any particular types of things like meetings or anything like that. Whenever you're emailing other people who are using either an Exchange server or Outlook.com, then you have the ability to be able to get some sense of whether or not they're available. You can allow for people to see that information and to really be able to get into that, right? So whenever you're looking at a particular aspect of Outlook, calendars is a good example. Typically, whenever you look on the far left-hand side, you have the option to create either a new appointment or a new meeting. What's also kind of interesting about working with any of these individual views is that whenever you double-click on a particular area, like say if you're looking at a view, you can double-click right on that exact time, and that will immediately start setting up your appointment for you. So, you can either just create a new appointment strictly from the push button, and it will just simply guess where it thinks, your meeting should begin and end. or you can just go ahead and just double click directly on the actual calendar, whichever view that you want to look at, and you'll see that there's a lot of details for it, right? So for something as simple as, let's say I'm teaching a course, so I might say something like delivering, I actually have an Excel 2010 level 2 course I'm delivering next week. So I'll say deliver Excel 2010, actually it's a level 3 pivot tables. So I'll just always say level 3 pivot tables course. And then my location, I can actually put in an actual location. What's really neat about the location is that when you put in an actual address, it will give you the ability to sort of show a map, right? So for example, I could say something like CTC Train Canada, and then I could say something like 361 Queen Street, Ottawa, ON, Canada. And I'll just tweak the actual timings. So I would normally get there for around about 8 o'clock. So typically I tend to go from about 8 to 4, get there a little early. It's normally a 9 to 4 delivery, but I'll go to about 8 to 4. And also I have some other things that would allow me to attach some notes. So for example, I have OneNote over here. If I wanted to open up a OneNote notebook and be able to attach some notes to that meeting or to that course that I'm delivering. I also have the option to use Link. And of course, Link, unfortunately, is not installed on this computer. But what Link does is essentially it acts kind of like Skype. It allows you to be able to have other people join your meeting either through an audio or video conference. So there's a lot of really interesting features that are kind of built into that. So although we can't use that feature and display it, it will be something that we would talk a lot more about during the regular course. We also have the option to show what I'm doing. So I could say things like I'm busy to everybody else who may want to bring me into a meeting or invite me. And I may also have some settings in here for how soon I would like a reminder. So typically, whenever I set reminders, I usually like to give myself a day's notice to just sort of beat me the night before and let me know what's going on with that. I can also set this as high or low importance, much like an email message. And I have all kinds of options to color code or categorize a lot of these features, right? So you'll see that a lot of the same basic types of things are available to you. And normally I just simply click on the essentials and then just click save and close. And as soon as I do that, you can see that instantly that information is there. It's already 6 hours overdue. It gave me a little instant message, but that's okay. You know, it actually did exactly what it was supposed to do. And it's giving me a sense of what I'm doing on that particular day. So I could also do the same thing as well. I could set up a similar meeting on my online calendar at hotmail.com. It's pretty much the same idea. One thing that's kind of interesting about all this is that, you know, there are different options to be able to publish this online. So if you actually have a customized server like a web DAV server, which is a calendar specific server, you don't necessarily have to rely on using Outlook.com or an Exchange server. There are other types of servers that you could potentially push a lot of these different meetings or scheduled appointments and stuff to. Beyond just simply using the essentials, right? So it's kind of interesting that you can sort of go all with that. You can also create a series of calendar groups. Again, this is really a little bit more detailed. I mean, I don't usually have so many things that I would need to really group them all together. Normally, I would just simply go in and I would set that up. You will also see that there is an option to open a shared calendar where you could have several people sharing all that information and sort of seeing where that all goes. Normally, whenever you look at the general display, you'll see that on the left-hand side, you can easily move around from day to day. So if I need to move over to December, I can easily sort of jump from day to day. You'll notice, of course, that the current day is very clearly indicated in bold. So it makes it very easy for you to get around and sort of find stuff. If you have so many items that you're not really sure what's going on, we can go in here and we can do a search for Excel. And if we type in the word Excel, then you can see there's my example of my delivering Excel 2010. If I double click on that, it shows me exactly where that appointment is, right? So it's kind of interesting. You have some very easy ways of being able to get into that. If you close the search, then what will happen is that you'll see all that content. One interesting thing about Outlook generally is that there's a lot of things that you can search for. So for example, there's a lot of connectors for things like social media. You could also add attachments such as documents and files to an actual calendar appointment. So there's a lot of interesting things that you could potentially include or embed on all these features. So that's something that's worth keeping in mind. One thing that's also worth keeping in mind as well is clicking on the actual File tab. As with all of the other Office applications from about 2010 to 2013 onward, you'll usually see that your options are directly available here. Now, this can sometimes be a little bit confusing because whenever you first start Outlook, typically what will happen is that it will prompt you to set up an email account and also to potentially set up things like connectors to Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or other social media accounts. And so if you do not see that, or if for whatever reason you do not have an account already set up, you may need to click on the File tab, and you'll see that you actually have your account settings directly available here. And you'll notice that when I click on this drop down, you'll actually see that I've already configured my hotmail.com account, and there's already the internal local account that we use for our training courses here. That's already been configured by the technicians here at CTC Train Canada. So you can have multiple accounts. Makes it very easy to get into them. If you want to add an account, it's usually pretty easy. All you usually need to do is just simply type in your name and your email address and your password. And if you're not really sure what kind of account that you have, there's an option over here called Manual Setup or Additional Server Types. You can choose Next. And then what it will do is it will give you the option to choose a particular type of account, like say a standard email, a POP or IMAP account. We'll choose Next. And then you'll see it may give you a slightly more detailed screen where you may have to put in a few extra pieces of information regarding the appropriate incoming and outgoing email server. So it depends on how your particular internet service provider works. But usually most companies will help to walk you through that process. One thing I will make a note of is that this process is very, very powerful. I actually remember when I first started using this a little over a year ago, and I needed to connect to Hotmail. And I have thousands and thousands of emails on my Hotmail account. And it did a very good job of not only recognizing it, but also bringing down all my folders, setting everything up very, very quickly. I think it downloaded something like nearly about 15,000 emails within about a few minutes. It was, I have a high-speed broadband connection at home, but wow, it came in around about, I don't know, it seems like about 15 minutes. It was probably actually a little faster. It was probably more like a little under 10 minutes. It was very, very quick. I got access to most of my older emails first. It tends to suck down all those ones first. So if you don't delete all of your emails, it makes it very challenging. What's really nice about all versions of Outlook is that when you're working with your mail section, regardless of whatever one you're looking at, I'll actually take a quick look at my Outlook Hotmail here. So if I click on this, you can see I have a whole bunch of different emails and things that I've downloaded, and it's still in the process of downloading more. It just makes it very easy to do things. Like, for example, I don't even need to click on this email. I can just hover over top of it and instantly delete all these emails. So I can also right-click on these emails, and I have lots of options to easily move them to another folder, or to move them to OneNote, or to set up rules or categorize them, or do all kinds of really interesting things. So really, this version is much, much faster, much more fluid, very easy to get to, and it's extremely fast. So I'm really happy with how well that works. It certainly is significantly better than 2010, definitely considerably better than earlier versions like say 03 or 07. So if you have not considered upgrading to Office 2013 yet, I have almost always advised most of my students to upgrade to 2013, if only just for Outlook. But there are a whole bunch of other reasons to upgrade, like Excel and a lot of other new features in PowerPoint as well. So certainly, if that is something that you need an excuse or a reason to go to, certainly that's something I would advise. Now, once you've actually set up all of your email accounts, working with email is actually pretty easy, even though there may be a fair amount of buttons, a few more than maybe what you might be comfortable with. Just like before, you have a new email button. There is also a new items button, which will allow you to create new appointments or new meetings or contacts or tasks very, very quickly. So it's not like you actually have to be in that viewing mode to do other things with that. Now, let's have a look at a new email. So it doesn't really matter which account I'm using. If I click on New Email, you'll see that I have an option for me to choose who I'm sending this from. So I can actually pick whichever account I'm sending it from, which is really nice. It saves me a lot of time. In this case, I'm going to send it from myself to myself. So I'll type in MJS Ottawa. You'll notice, of course, that as I start typing in people who I know, right, basically it will recognize the names of all the peoples in my contacts. So this is really, really cool. I can actually spend a lot of time really sort of seeing who is in my list rather than me having to worry about whether or not I've got the right email address. For now, I'm just going to resend this email to myself. And you'll see, of course, I can just give this a subject. So I can say something like test email for Outlook 2013 webinar. And then in here, of course, I have the main area of the message itself. So I'll say, hi, Mark. This is a sample email message for the CTC Train Canada Outlook 2013 webinar. Let's say sincerely, Mark. Now, you will notice, of course, that this is a very plain vanilla email message. For a lot of my emails, I actually have a built-in signature, which I'll talk a little bit about in just a moment. There is actually a signature button which will allow you to set that up much more quickly than previous versions. Before, in the past, you usually have to go back to your file options, and that command is there. Oh, some people say they have no sound. So I don't know, Alex, hopefully you can help with that. Let me just check and see. I'll try and see if I can speak a little louder, but I don't know. I mean, Alex is monitoring this, so hopefully he'll be able to take care of that. So hopefully that will work okay. I don't know. I mean, I'm speaking at the same level. Let me just try unmuting and coming back on. I'm not going to take too long here because I'm assuming that everyone else is okay. Hang on. Back in. I don't know if that's made any difference. If you're losing out the sound, it's possible for some of you, you may have to go ahead and be able to, you may have to just disconnect from WebEx and reconnect again. Sometimes that will often fix the problem, okay? So hopefully that won't be too much of an issue. Okay, let's get back to it. So when I'm working with email, what's really nice about creating the messages is that most of everything that you need is already available to you right here on your message tab. So doing things like cut, copy, and paste, changing the appearance of the, I'm sorry, Linda, Alex is going to have to help you out. So I can't help you out with that. It's a technical issue. You're going to have to sort of continue from there. Okay? Okay. So anyway, so as I'm continuing on, so as we look at all the contents of the email, very easy. You can select any of the text. You can easily bold it. You can italicize it, do all those sorts of things. Normally, I tend to sort of have my own approach of bolding and italicize certain kinds of text. I mean, there are templates and things you can use as you create emails, but usually it's not that big of a thing. Notice, of course, there is a button to send. Before I send, though, I do want to draw attention to some of the other areas of the screen. Okay, so for example, there is a CC button. If you click on it, you'll actually see you get both CC and BCC. The difference between the two, of course, is that CC is a carbon copy. So if I wanted to send a copy of this to my friend Michael, what I would do is I would basically insert his email address and do that. If I wanted to send this to my friend Michael Black, then what I would need to do is I might consider using BCC. And what I can do is when I do that, if I put in Michael Black's email, then that will allow me to open up that area. I can then easily select his Gmail address. And of course, when I choose BCC, what would happen is that Michael Cumming would not be able to see Michael Black's address. Okay, so in other words, everyone that you BCC this to, they would not be able to see that they're getting emails to each other. In fact, one little tip that I like to use is I often tend to BCC copies of email directly to myself. So even if I was sending this directly to Michael, and let's say I was blind carbon copying Michael Black, excuse me, what would typically happen is that Michael would get the email. Michael Black would also see that that's going to Michael as well, but anybody else who was on this BCC line, they would not be aware that everybody else that was on that same line was receiving those emails, right? And then I would probably also BCC myself, so I would type in my own name, so I could put in something like, say, MJS Ottawa, and include him. And then what would happen is that when I send that email, I would get a copy of this, making sure that it actually did get sent out generally, right? So that's kind of a neat trick that I like to use. Usually when I get those BCC'd replies back, or those BCC'd copies of what I'm sending out, it's just a way of me confirming that in fact the actual email is going out to the larger internet. If there is an issue with internet email going out, then typically within about 60 to 120 seconds, within a couple of minutes, you would usually get a message back from the email system saying there was a problem with delivering the email, if perhaps you mistyped the email address, or if there was some other physical block or any problem with sending emails. Usually, when you're having issues with difficulties with emails, they often tend to involve things like files. A good example is I could click on this option to attach a file, and if I go into my computer and go to local disk, what I will do is I'll go into my, I actually have on my C drive, I actually have some test macros, which I did for a previous course. And what I'll do is I'll insert this sample Excel document. And you'll notice that most small files up to about a couple of megabytes are fine. You can easily include them as a payload along with your email message. However, if that does not work, then what you may need to do is you may need to consider using or inserting other documents, like say things on OneDrive. Okay, so we will talk a little bit further about this later on in this course. Okay, normally when you attach other items, you could include things like business cards. Business cards essentially are contacts, so they would be people that you would put in your people area. So if you wanted to freely exchange business cards, then all you need to do is just literally create a contact with as much information as you need, and you can swap that information, and it will import and export very easily back and forth between people who have Outlook at both ends. Okay. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of compatibility between contacts and things like Google or Google Calendars and the calendars in here. They are largely only unique to what you see in Outlook. You can export information from these calendars into other formats, but it takes several steps. So this would be something that you would need to consider looking at in the full course. Okay. Normally, you have some additional options to insert. So you have an option to insert a signature or insert other details. Whenever you need to insert any information, let's say, for example, I want to type in information en français. So let's say I was typing some information about there is an upcoming course that will be held in Montreal, Quebec. So what I would typically do is that if I have characters that require French accents, I would typically just use my keyboard. So what I could do is I could just simply use my numerics lock on my actual physical Dell keyboard that I have here. And then if I turn my numerics lock on, then I can use my actual keypad, my physical numeric keypad on the right-hand side, and I can use something like Alt 130, and then I already know a lot of the codes for a lot of these sort of common commands. Now, if that doesn't work for you, or if you don't really have a functional keypad, another way that you could also insert those kinds of characters would be to use the Insert Symbol option. And if you choose more symbols, what this will do is that you would typically choose whatever the current font is, right? So typically the font for much of 2013 is the Calibri font. So what I'll do is I'll just choose Calibri. You'll typically see that also in Microsoft Word. And so Calibri looks exactly the same as the text that we see in the message. And then if you go to the very top of this list, you should see a section called Basic Latin. And if you go to Basic Latin, if you scroll down a little bit, you should be able to see all the relevant sort of common French language types of accents. So you have accent aigu, accent grave, circonflexe, cedilla, all those sorts of things. So pretty much everything you need, whether they're uppercase and lowercase, are all available here. So I'm going to choose this acute accent with lowercase e. It will also tell you what the character code is. It will also show you another shortcut key. I actually use Alt 130, but you could also use 0233. We'll click Insert, and you'll see that when I click Close, it's inserted that exact character perfectly. What's really neat about the symbol menu is when you choose it, it will actually show you your most recently used symbols so that you don't have to go hunting around for it again. So it's already there. I can easily sort of choose all my frequently used French language symbols, and they would eventually show up in this little reminder screen, right? So it's going to remember all that stuff for you. So that makes it really easy to get to. Now, obviously, if you look at the options, you have a few more advanced features. This would allow you to do things like create some voting buttons and create like almost like a sample sort of survey. You also have the option to request a delivery receipt and a read receipt. So this is kind of cool. If I actually activate these two features, Outlook would actually send a request out to the corresponding email server to check and see whether or not A, it had actually been delivered and received by the inbox of that person at their end, and then also to see whether or not they'd actually opened it and read it, right? And so the person would actually have to agree to send that read receipt back, right? So they would actually get a request to do that. There's some additional buttons for formatting and review as well. But the review is pretty straightforward. It's really just there just to review things like spelling and grammar. You also have some options to do some basic translation. That's actually built into Outlook itself. And you also have some language settings, right? So you have a lot of really sort of very simplistic tools, a lot of things which have been almost been cribbed in and brought in from Word. And I mean, this isn't a replacement certainly for Word as a word processor, but it does have a lot of Word-like functionality. So if you're already comfortable with Word, then you'll probably find it very easy to be able to get into this. And it is pretty easy to figure out even regardless of whether or not you use Word. But it provides some fairly simple ways for you to be able to get into that, right? So all I would need to do would just be to click send, and then what that will do is that'll send that out, right? And I'll usually need to go in and check. It's still actually downloading a lot of my more recent emails, so I don't know how long it's going to take before I get that other email sent in. Usually if I need to check my email, I would typically highlight the folder that I would like to get emails for, and on the send receive button, there's an option called send receive all folders. And so when you click on this, what this should do is it should refresh all of this content and continue from there. Okay? So that's basically all there is to it as far as that stuff all goes. Okay? Now, one thing that's worth sort of keeping in mind is that when you're working within Outlook generally, you might want to make a note of the File tab and on the options. So some of you might be wondering, well, where did I get those really cool weather settings for things like my calendar? Because a lot of those things aren't turned on. On your file options, you'll see that there's a general set of settings, and you'll notice that you have things like live preview, right? So this is kind of cool. The live preview essentially allows you to essentially sort of, as you're making changes to things like the look of your text in your document, if you choose a different font, it will show you all those details. So this is very similar to the way it works in Word. I can also personalize my copy of Office. I could put in my own proper name and my proper initials. Normally it ignores a lot of this stuff. My username and my initials are not necessarily coded to this part of the actual product. It's actually coded to my actual account. So I have all those details. You'll also see that on the Mail tab, I have specific commands and settings that are unique to just to Mail. And you'll actually see that a lot of these settings have not changed very much from the last two previous versions. So you'll see that there are, of course, a few familiar buttons that allow you to do things like update signatures. So when you create a signature, of course, you can do this either directly in the email or from the options. I'll do it from here, just so you can see what that looks like. And of course, a signature is really nothing more than a way of being able to pre-build your setting with your name at the bottom, right? So your name, your address, or information. I'll call this something like Hotmail signature. I'm not going to make this too detailed. I'm just going to put in enough basic information. So in here, I'm going to be editing my signature. So I'll type in my name, and I'll put in my position. I'm a certified Microsoft professional instructor. And I'll put in my email. I'll put in my location. And typically, you know, in my email address, I would usually put in things like my phone number, but I'm going to just simply focus on just putting in my email address for now. And usually I tend to, you know, put this information on no more than about 2 or 3 lines. Obviously, I could select the text and make the text a little bit bigger. So I could like maybe make this something like say 16 point. And I might decide to get all fancy and bold all this stuff. And I might decide to make all this say maybe like say 12 or 14 point. So what I'll do is I'll bold this, and maybe I'll italicize that, right? I'll actually remove the italics from that, so it looks nice and consistent. So that looks pretty good. Bear in mind that, you know, I can also provide some additional details, but you'll notice that there's not a lot of changes in here. I could actually make this colorful. I could actually go in here and select my text, and I do have a limited range of colors that I can sort of pick from. Actually, I could make this really any color that I want, but normally I usually tend to sort of pick the web safe colors that you'll usually see within this drop down. So I might want to make that a slightly nicer blue. I might want to choose the same blue in here as well to make that look nice. You know, again, how much color I want to use is really up to me. I don't usually tend to use a lot of color because truthfully, I find that if I start overdoing it on color, then people might, you know, really not see my name properly. So most of the time, I usually just stick with just fairly basic colors and things like bolding and italics and maybe a little bit of change to the point size. I could, of course, choose a lot of other different types of fonts, right? So, for example, I could, if I prefer a different font, I could just simply scroll down, make that look a little bit nicer. So a good one that a lot of people like to use. If you like the actual appearance of the Microsoft font, you might want to consider using a font like, say, Sego UI. This is very much a very Microsoft sort of feel to that font. And I still have Calibri here, but I actually like to use Sego UI for pretty much everything. So that really makes that look really nice. I may not need to use that quite so large. I might want to bring the point size down just a little bit, just to sort of tweak it. Again, I'm being really picky here. But once I have that all ready to go, then all I need to do is just simply say, I'll just use save. And I have options in here to automatically choose my default signatures. So I have one for brand new emails, and I also have ones for replies and forwards to any of my emails. So when I choose the Hotmail signature, the one that's already been pre-saved, it's automatically going to append and include that information when I create those emails. So let's click OK and see how well that works. So I'll go back to my email setting, choose Home, click on New Email, and you'll see there's my instant signature. Very, very effective, very professional looking, looks nice. Then I can say, okay, hello, I'll say something like Bev, I need to schedule more courses with CTC Train Canada. All those sorts of things. So pretty easy, you know. So I also have the signature here. So if I have a different signature, if I want to replace this one with a different one, I'm not limited to having one. I usually have about 3 or 4 different signatures for various personal and professional associations or other roles that I fulfill with other community groups and things like that. So it's very easy to set all those up, whether or not you do them from here or whether or not you do them from your options. Pretty easy to get into. So again, a lot of those same basic features, they have not changed all that much. They're still essentially the same as before. Okay, so pretty basic. Now, what I want to do is I want to take a quick look at some of these other settings very quickly. I want to have a look at people. People is essentially your contacts. So this is very important. There's a lot of really important things you can get from this. What's really interesting about working with contacts is that as you're sending emails back and forth, if you right-click on an email and that person is not already in your contacts list, you'll be able to easily add them. But a lot of the time, you may find it a lot easier to just create a lot of these contacts from scratch. So I'm going to create my own name as a contact. So what I'll typically do is I'll type in my full name, and I might put in my company, but I'll leave that blank for now. I'll just put it myself in as an instructor. And I'll put in my default email address. So I'm just simply tabbing over to that, but I could also go in here and do that. You'll see I have an option to say display as mjsottawa@hotmail.com. I might want to say display as Mark Shepard and then put my email address within that so that way it looks a little different in the actual email. Okay? So, I mean, I'm just being picky, but I don't have to do that. I also have options to put in things like a web page address. So if I have a blog, like say on WordPress or something like that, I would usually do that. I also have an instant email address if I wanted to include those as well. You'll also see that there are considerably more room for things like phone numbers. So this is actually a considerably improved feature. Typically, I would do things like put in my regular business and mobile number. I'll actually put in my regular mobile number first. So I would then just put in this in. I'm just going to put in a phony number. Okay, this is not my actual phone number. Okay, and then I might also want to have my regular business number. So if I include all that, you'll see that as I put in all my information, everything is all being updated in my business contact card. You'll also notice that there is actually an option for a picture. If you click on the picture, you can actually add a contact picture. And now I don't actually have one handy, but if I was, you know, this lovely attractive koala, if that was my picture, then I could actually have that there. So obviously I would take my own picture with my photo, email it to myself, and then I would include it. But all of this information is actually included right inside of this actual little contact card. And so if I wanted to, I could actually email all this information and make it very easy to share with other users. You'll notice that there is another picture down here. This is a little bit different. This is actually my social media picture. So if you want, you could actually connect to your picture off of Facebook, and you would do that from there. In order to do that, what you would have to do is you'd have to go back to your file options. And you should have some different options in there which will allow you to get to that. So let me just see if I can find it. They moved it around a little bit. I'll go into people and see where that is. Might actually need to be in the, might actually be in a different location. Might even be in general, I'm not sure. Let me just see if I can find it. Where did they move it to? I know they got it in there somewhere. I might actually just have to right click on it. Let me just go back to my main mail screen. So if I actually right click, I have Outlook properties. So I have some display names. So I have some options where I could actually set up things like Yelp and put in some information for that. Let me just see what else I have here. I'll click on my drop-down panel. So I have contact information. Let's just see. It doesn't have it handy. View more options. I don't see more options. What's new? Oh yeah, here we go. So there's an option called What's New. It says connect your online social networks. It's actually built right in here. So when you click on this, what this does is it will actually run a generic wizard that will allow you to connect to all of your social networks. So you can actually choose everything from Facebook to LinkedIn. If there are additional ones, there are usually new ones that are being added all the time. I'll choose Facebook just as an example. And in order for me to do this, I would actually have to put in my full email address for Facebook. And if I was going to connect to Facebook, I would actually have to put in my password. So bear with me a second. I'm just going to look up my password very quickly and see if I can do that. I'm running a little bit short on time, so I'll just leave it for now. Typically, all you would just do is you just put in your password, and then what it would do is it would automatically connect you to Facebook. It may actually prompt you to accept whether or not you want to share information with Outlook. And the same thing is also true with LinkedIn. And depending on which of these you connect to, typically when you're all done, I'll just simply say remind me later. What will happen is you'll actually see that picture right inside of that. So you may also sometimes see a picture in the corner of all of your various office applications, because this will not only connect you to social networks for Outlook, it'll also do it for all of your applications. Okay. Now for tasks is really just a to-do list. So there's really nothing very difficult for that. If you wanted to create a new task, this is kind of like a checklist of things to do. So if I click on new task, it's pretty straightforward. I might want to do something like pick up groceries. So what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll say that this is not started. Priority is maybe high, and I'll pick a start date and an end date. So I'll make it today's date. And I may also want to give myself a reminder. I'll set that reminder to just before I leave. And I may also want to put in a % complete. And if I have some notes, I'll say, make sure you stop in at Independent Grocer before going home. So there we go. So we have all that information. We'll choose Save and Close. And that information will be in there. Now, of course, if you see a whole bunch of information, like you have a whole bunch of things like your Bell e-bills ready, these are all things that are actually selected values that are emails, right? So these are emails that I've actually flagged. So if I don't want to see all those things in my to-do list, then typically what I would do is I'd have to unflag all those emails. Now I have one here, and I can actually go in here and I can say, just type in the word groceries. So I could actually just do a search or do a filter, but I'll do a filter first. So if I do groceries, then you'll see it will actually do that. Actually, I used the wrong filter, so I'll just do it that way. So there, it's searching for groceries. Should take only a second or two to get that. I don't know how that's included in groceries, but should just be able to go in there and search. So I don't know why that's not working. Typically, it's not a big deal, but I don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to have to cancel it for now. Okay? So anyway, I'll just take a couple of minutes here and just start to wrap things up a little bit. One thing that's kind of interesting about working with this new version of Outlook is that, as I mentioned, it is generally pretty easy to use. I mean, you know, there's a lot of features that do take a little bit of getting used to. Probably the one that will take the most time will be with this whole idea of switching back and forth between your mail, calendar, people, and tasks. If you were doing this within, like, say, Hotmail, you would do this in a web browser, and there would be a series of icons that would allow you to switch back and forth. You might have also noticed that there's a little button for a menu over here, and you'll also notice that you have things like your notes, your folders, and other shortcuts. There is a setting over here called Navigation Options. And what's kind of interesting about this is that if you have a very compact display, like say a very small screen, like say a very small netbook or a tablet, you can actually compact this navigation. And when you do that, what that will do is it will give you icons for each of those items. So it will take up a lot less space. You could even go in and put in the full number of all of the items in this list. You'll actually see that there are 7 distinct items. And if you turn off the compact option, you'll see the regular text will show up at the bottom, and you can essentially see everything. Okay? So if you have a big enough display, you can experiment with a few of these settings and you can change how this all looks and works. I mean, obviously, there's a lot you can do with Outlook. There's a ton of different things that are there. I've really only sort of begun to scratch the surface of this. If you take the full course, we'll also show you things like how to be able to create things like rules, so that way whenever you get a particular type of email from a certain person or individual or by a certain subject, you can have it automatically copy and paste those information into specific folders. A lot of different things you can do. So certainly, Outlook gives you the ability to really easily create those folders. So you'll see I have a ton of folders in here. If I wanted to create a new one, I can just simply click on the folder tab and just choose new folder. And I can call this something like webinar. And we'll click OK. And then what that will do is that will create a webinar folder somewhere down here in the bottom of all my folders. You'll actually see that I have all my original folders from my old Hotmail, plus the ones that were created specifically from Outlook. These are all Outlook specific folders that I'm trying to do just to kind of clean up my overall inbox. You can see I have nearly 5,000 of unread emails that I have to sort of work with, right? But you can see that gradually some of these are sort of coming through. So for whatever reason, so there's a couple of emails that didn't go through because these emails have expired. But other than that, you can sort of see that pretty much everything else is coming through okay. And there's all my content, right? So if I right click on this person, I have some options to add them automatically to an Outlook contact. So that's really, really cool, right? I can go to this email and I can right click on either of these people, whether it's Michael or myself, instantly add them as a contact. And then I have their basic email contact information there. That's already set all that up and that's all ready to go. So I could actually go back to Michael's contact a little later on and add in things like his updated email address, his phone number, all that good stuff, right? So thank you again for attending this webinar. Please feel free to ask some questions if you need to, and we'll look forward to hopefully seeing you sometime in the near future at CTC. Thanks very much, guys. We'll hope to talk to you soon.